Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 104 points to close at 27,687. The Nasdaq fell 185 points, and the S&P 500 slipped 27. Still to come on the NewsHour, Lebanon grapples with multiple...
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
It's now been one academic year gets underway at colleges and universities. Students, parents, administrators, and faculty and residents of college towns are all asking the same questions. Will it be safe? Should students return to campus? John Yang reports on those concerns and then looks at the larger questions around affordability and cost that are getting new attention during the pandemic. It's part of our special series on Rethinking College.
On campuses across the country, this year's annual student move-in has been a little different from the past. Much smaller crowds.
It's just odd not seeing anybody. You know, you expect it to be hustle and bustle.
And just about everybody wearing a mask.
I know I'm going to do my part. I just hope other people do theirs.
Millions of students, parents, and college administrators have been wondering the same thing. Is it safe? In May, the 23-campus California State University system said there would be no in-person classes this fall. Johns Hopkins and Princeton universities made that move only last week.
In order to move in this year, you're going to want to make sure that you have a reservation beforehand.
According to Davidson University's College Crisis Initiative, which tracks higher education's pandemic response, only about 3/4 of U.S. colleges have a plan. What schools decide affects more than just classrooms and campuses. It's also felt throughout college towns like Amherst, Massachusetts, home to Amherst College, Hampshire College, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which is known as UMass. In a normal fall, their combined enrollments would double the town's population. In June, UMass, by far the largest of the three schools, announced that all students could return to campus when the fall semester begins later this month, even if all their classes would be online.
You lower your mask and you put it into your nostril.
A system is in place for students to self-administer coronavirus tests twice a week, and they must pledge in writing to wear masks in public, not gather in large groups, and maintain social distancing. UMass Chancellor Kumble Subbaswamy.
We thought with all the steps we were taking in terms of testing and contact tracing and all the precautions, and in fact, well beyond the precautions recommended by the CDC and so forth, that we could safely invite students back.
Some year-round Amherst residents disagreed.
When we started to see what the university's plans were in their first communications, it was alarming.
Robin Jaffin asked people to sign a petition that said returning students will increase the risk to our communities. A big concern, the behavior of students living off campus.
How do you actually implement the set of requirements for them that you have set for the same student body that's on campus?
This weekend there'll be a lot of parties. Yeah. There's still a lot of students who live in town.
Town officials worried that an influx of students could drive up the area's currently low infection rate. Town manager Paul Bockelman.
The real fear is if our local hospital gets overwhelmed, and we have worked hard to manage that. We fear that our public safety, emergency medical services, and police will get overwhelmed.
Colleges are very comparable to landlocked cruise ships.
Students who work in dormitories as residential assistants and peer mentors also voiced their opposition. Rising senior James Cordero is a leader of their labor union.
And the fact is, when you put that many people together in such confined spaces, social distancing is such the opposite of what those environments are built for.
On the other hand, local business leaders fear the economic impact of a fall without students. Gabrielle Gould is executive director of Amherst Downtown Business Improvement District.
If we lose our student population, we will lose more businesses than we already are presented with losing due to the COVID pandemic.
Amherst Books is the town's last remaining brick-and-mortar bookstore. Co-owner Nat Harold says he felt caught between a rock and a hard place.
I could probably speak for most of the merchants in town that we're looking forward to having business come back to town, but we're also terrified that people are going to bring the virus. I mean, I need the business, but I also would just assume the students not come back.
As the academic year approached, and with the pandemic worsening nationwide, UMass officials realized their plan presented daunting logistical challenges, like regularly testing all students.
It's easy to say we'll test, everyone twice a week or something like that. But then if you start working out the details of what that'll entail, in fact, as an observed sample taking, that takes, in fact, a lot of time and a lot of people.
He wrote the UMass community late last week, abruptly reversing course. Only students who are enrolled in essential face-to-face classes will be accommodated in campus residence halls. Instead of 15,000 students on campus, officials now expect fewer than 1,200 in UMass dorms and another 3,000 living in town. Most are in classes like science labs, which have been modified for social distancing. The Amherst residents' concerns had been heard.
We were both drifting in that direction of saying we don't want as many students. And so to get to that decision to reduce the number, a lot of deliberation had to go into it. So that's really a lot of the steps we were learning as we were going along.
A continuing education for college administrators across the country. Higher education's response to the pandemic, especially the move away from in-person classes to online learning, is highlighting larger questions about the high price tag on a college degree. Scott Galloway is a leading voice in that debate. He's a leading critic of high tuition costs. He's a professor of marketing at New York University, and he joins us now. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. What has this pandemic, this move away, the response we've seen from colleges, some of them putting all their classes online, what's that done to this debate about college tuition costs?
Well, COVID-19 isn't as much a change agent as it is an accelerator, and we've seen tuition up 2.5-fold over the last 20 years at public universities. Meanwhile, the product really hasn't changed much. So try and name an industry that has increased its prices 150% with no underlying increase in output or innovation. What this has done is drawn back the curtain on what has become incredibly unsustainable pricing. Spring used to be a season of nervousness and joy about where you were going to school. Now it's become one of financial despair, and we have priced ourselves literally out of the market. And with remote learning, a lot of parents and students are deciding it's just not worth it.
It's not worth it. They don't see the value of paying tuition to sit in front of a computer?
Well, primarily speaking, a university value is from three things: the certification, the education, and the experience. And we have raised prices so quickly that any sort of reduction in any one of those three things has really caused people to decide or rethink their decision. And with the experience so dramatically decreased, or disabled, if you will, a lot of parents are saying, do I really want to pay $58,000, $68,000 a year for a series of Zoom classes?
My colleague, producer Courtney Norris, spoke with Terry Hartle, who's Senior Vice President of the American Council on Education, which represents about 1,700 colleges and universities, and asked him about some of these issues. And I want you to listen to what he had to say on this question of costs, and then we'll talk about it afterward.
Colleges and universities were funded about $8 billion in room and board charges alone in the spring when they closed early. Taken together, lost revenue, cost increases, enrollment declines, cuts in state support, and increases in student financial need add up to roughly $120 billion. To put that in context, total revenue of colleges and universities in 2018 was $650 billion. So we're dealing with a sudden traumatic shock to the budgetary systems of every institution of higher education.
What do you have to say to that this is actually increasing costs or for colleges and universities?
There's no doubt about it. Mr. Hartle and his constituents find themselves in a very tough place. The question is, did we have it coming? And that is, how are they responding? And instead of cutting costs and doing what every other industry is doing and does on a regular basis, instead of having an open and sober conversation and cutting costs such that we can increase the quality of remote learning while decreasing costs, we have entered into consensual hallucination with our finance departments and parents that we can have some semblance of a normal experience such that we can continue to charge these usurious rates. And what is the mother of all tone-deaf decisions? My host institution, NYU, has decided to raise their tuition 3.5%. So what I would say to Mr. Hartle is that he has to endure the same pain as every other industry that consumes their product standing or sitting shoulder to shoulder, whether it's sports, whether it's restaurants, whether it's sports, and that is get to the good work of cost cutting and getting leaner and meaner. Instead, they've entered into this era of denial, which will only make the unwinding in the fall that we're gonna have even more painful.
You've also said that you think this is going to make a change in what higher education looks like. What do you think higher education will look like after the pandemic?
I think it'll be a hybrid model. It'll be a mix of online and offline. Faculty has been very resistant to embracing technology. I'm not suggesting it's an either or, but an and. The reality is many of these classes could be taught online with the same level of outcome. It's the off-campus socialization that is probably the most valuable thing in terms of in-person. So you can envision the silver lining here is as big as the cloud. If we move to a scenario where, again, with innovation and the embrace of small and big tech and reduction in the cost and an dramatic increase in supply of freshman seats, we might find, like every other industry, that we can increase the quality of the product and lower the price. And we have done neither of those in education. This isn't a debate, it's an IQ test. Any sober analysis of the upside versus the downside shows that we are going to be all remote across almost every university this fall. It's just a question of how many infections we endure and how much pain we levy on university communities. Universities, John, have been the warriors fighting viruses, not its enablers. We need to close campuses, full stop, right away.
Scott Galloway of New York University's Stern School of Business. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, John.